Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Nick Tackes. We're here at the ASIANetwork 2026 annual meeting, and I'm joined by Yidi and Brian Hoffert, who are going to talk with us about reacting to the past, a particular type of in-class role-playing game that they found great success with. Thank you both for joining me to talk.
Of course. Thank you for having us.
Great. So I just wanted to start by inviting you to say a little bit more about reacting to the past. What is it, and what would other ASIANetwork members expect to gain from incorporating it into their classrooms?
I would think of reacting to the past as an active learning pedagogy that allows students to take on historical characters, to impersonate these characters, and to engage in speech and debate, and to learn about historical empathy, learn about historical contingency, and to practice primary source analysis and public speaking.
I guess what I would add to that is we talk in liberal arts a lot about critical thinking skills as something that we're trying to help our students develop. The empathy part, I think, is really important for that, being able to put yourself in someone else's perspective, to be able to try and, in these games you take on rules, and so you may disagree with the character's perspective that you're playing, but you have to try and understand the world through their eyes. And I think that's an invaluable part of critical thinking, is be able to have a real conversation with someone else who thinks differently. So often we're just thinking about, what do I want to say in response to them? What's my perspective? And to beat someone else down. But this teaches us the ability to understand someone else's perspective. So I think that's an essential part of critical thinking. And the other thing that's important for me is the idea of creativity. I still think that creativity is essentially what I'm trying to do in the class, what I'm trying to do in a liberal arts education is, how do you get students to gain the kind of skills that they need to go out into the world and solve problems? And that ultimately is just about being creative, right? Being able to take a bunch of information and put it together in some new way. And so these games are just, they're just perfect places to teach that kind of creativity.
So on that note, the Reacting to the Past games are games that are meant to be incorporated within the broader architecture of a one-semester-long course. You have told me in other conversations that some of the games are much shorter and compact, others are more long-standing. How do you incorporate these games within your broader courses?
So I also teach world history through using 2 games throughout the semester, because each game takes about 4 weeks, including the preparation, the game session about 5 to 6, and then the post-mortem reflection discussion session. So that's about 4 weeks per game, right? But for my modern China class, I use a shorter game, which only takes 1 to 2 game sessions, and so I can get in as many as 6, a total of 6, throughout the semester, while using textbooks covering the rest.
So that's to say then that the games are sort of what happens in the middle of a unit after some preface work or introductory work, and before some maybe reflexive work or reflective work on the topics or on the particular topics of those games?
Yes, in a way, we have to prepare our students, right, before getting into the game. They need to think about the historical context. They need to at least read the primary sources, right, before they incorporate it into their speech. So the preparation is very important. And then after the game sessions, I would also emphasize having this reflection in terms of what's the similarities and differences between what happened in the game versus what happened in history, right? So that reflection is quite important as well.
I think about in my Intro to East Asia class, 100 level class, and we play a game that's on Japanese Pan-Asianism, this idea of a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, where Japan, from its perspective, is not engaged in colonialism, but rather is anti-imperialism. That is the West that's imperialist, and they're saving East Asia from from Western imperialism. That, developing that, so we go over the events leading up to World War II and through World War II. And so we actually go through World War II before then going back and playing a game of Japan's perspective on World War II as seen through this game.
Yeah.
And I think that, that really helps. And so, I was doing that already before I started playing the game, so it sort of slotted in nicely. But just being thoughtful of making sure they have that context, and also because the game is really about developing that empathy, and it's something that you talk about a lot, this idea of getting into someone else's perspective. And this particular game, the students are, many of them are ministers of war, and
right.
On the Japanese government making these decisions to attack Pearl Harbor, and knowing that was going to be in the game, that then became a theme that I helped to build up beforehand. So it changed how I taught the course as well.
Sure. You have to know whose shoes you're stepping into before you step into them. Yeah.
But I will just say about that particular game, which is one of my favorites, I think better than any of the other games I've ever played, it gets, especially American students who've grown up thinking about Japan's involvement in World War II from one perspective, it gets them to at least see a completely different perspective on what's going on there. They don't have to agree with it, right? And Japan was engaged in colonialism, right? But to understand that they didn't see it that way, and that the pressures that are going on that lead to this attack on Pearl Harbor, and how that became inevitable, is something that I don't imagine that they're getting in most high school history classes, let alone even most college history classes that cover World War II. Mm-hmm. They're probably not adopting the Japanese perspective in that way.
Mm-hmm.
These games usually, are appealing to students who are natural talkers, right? Because they can show off, they feel very at ease with talking. It can be quite challenging for people who are more shy or who are reserved, who don't usually talk in class, right? So how to push themselves to speak in front of the audience, how to practice, delivering good message, it's important, right? And they see that, they think it's an important life skill, and they practice that throughout the semester. And so I still remember this one girl in my class from the beginning, very shy. Throughout the semester, I see her change and improve. And by the end, she was able to deliver a speech off script. It was brilliant. I was quite impressed how much growth I saw through her. And I feel quite accomplished as well.
There was a student who came up in the beginning before when I was talking about what we were doing, and she said she's deathly afraid of public speaking. Yeah. And I had a lot of conversation with her, and I said, if you're really, really uncomfortable, maybe I could find something else, or find something else. But the whole course was really built around these two games, and so I wasn't quite sure what to do. So I encouraged her to confront her fears. I said, look, we've got public speaking peer. Other students work with students. They help them practice their speeches. They give them feedback, and it's peer. It's the other students instead of faculty and stuff like that. I said, why don't you go to them and you can work with it? And she did, and she was very open, and she was willing to do this and learn. And then we had the first day of the game, and she came in and she had a complete breakdown. And was just totally unable to do it. And of course, I said, don't worry about it, go home, relax. We'll figure something else out later. But from that experience, I've always made sure that every game I play has rules that are non-speaking. Mm-hmm. I always mention to students when before I'm assigning roles, if you have this deathly fear, sure, do your best to push yourself, to challenge yourself. But if you really can't do it, there are some other options.
I think a lot of faculty are intimidated by this pedagogy. They feel like it's a lot of preparation. It's a big learning curve for faculty to choose a new pedagogy. That's why there are a lot of workshops. So like
Yeah.
the one I run, we run together for ASIANetwork, but also the Reacting Consortium has the annual workshops for faculty to experience these games. So that would be the first step if folks want to try it out. By themselves first before they test on their students.
Yeah.
But I would also say start with smaller games just for one session to see how it goes before you launch yourself into more extensive 5-6 session games. So start small, but also I would say the Reacting community, it's very friendly. We have the Reacting Faculty Lounge on Facebook that's very active, and whenever people post questions, there will be always responses, and so people are really willing to help each other out, and so it's a welcoming community that you will always find support.
Well, thank you both for joining me for a conversation. I think that the Reacting to the Past model holds a lot of promise. I'm looking forward to seeing new games as they filter into the repertoire of Reacting to the Past games online. And I hope that other ASIANetwork members find opportunities to incorporate this role-playing games dimension into future classes as well.